All right, good morning. All right, so let's see if I can get this. Looks a little blurry. So while I'm working on that, are there any questions, concerns, issues, anything anybody's run into recently that we need to worry about or talk about?
Under which section is the recordings for the past sessions?
Okay, so let me I'm going to share my other screen with you, and I'll show you exactly where that's located. So if you're looking for recordings, okay, so in Blackboard, if you click on the collaborate link, just like you would to access the class, instead of actually selecting one of the classes, you'll see there's a menu right up here with the three horizontal lines. When you click on that, you have the option to select recordings here, and that's where all the recordings for the classes will be located. Okay. You can see here they're sorted by date, right? So the oldest is at the bottom, the newest is at the top. So you can see all three from this week so far here. Just know it does take a couple hours for Blackboard to process the video. So even after class, you're probably looking at least 2 to 3 hours before the video actually shows up there. Any questions there now? Any other questions, comments, concerns before we get started? All right. So just a couple of other things. The next homework right now is scheduled to be due on Monday night by midnight. Again, we'll play that by ear. We'll see how far we get today and tomorrow. If I need to push that back, we will. But you can at least go ahead and get a start on it because this 3-5 stuff that we're working on now, that's the first few questions in there. So you'll at least be able to get a jump start on it if you want to start working on that. The other two things I want to mention, and I posted announcements about these, but if you haven't seen those, number one, I think I might have already mentioned this, but I decided to put an announcement out just in case. There will be no WFs for this semester. So, the last data withdrawal was supposed to be April 9th or whatever it was. There's no longer a last data withdrawal. We're trying to encourage students to stick with the class as long as possible. So you can actually stay in the class all the way up until the final exam and then decide to drop. Now, you cannot take the final exam, see your final grade, and then decide to drop. You would have to drop before you actually sit for the final exam. But at least that way kind of going in whether you have a shot at passing or not, and then you can make a decision of whether or not to drop. Okay, so just so you know, no last data withdrawal. Just make sure you withdraw before the final exam if you're planning to drop the class. The other thing is if you're struggling with Wi-Fi issues, anything like that, we're moving a lot of the routers and stuff closer to the external parts of our buildings. That way, if you want to pull into one of our parking lots and use Wi-Fi for free there, that should be available starting Monday. And I posted a link. I don't know if the link is live yet, but that should give you more information about where you would want to park to be able to access those Wi-Fi hotspots. So just know if if you need internet access, especially, if maybe yours is a little slower at home or something, and you want to use the campus's Wi-Fi, you should be able to do that from our parking lots starting on Monday. All right. I think that's all I've got. So let's go ahead and jump back into some math again. So if we look here at example 5, again, this is still section 3.5. If we're trying to find all the zeros, and again, here it says there's going to be 4 of them, and we can know that just from 3 here is 4, what would be our first step to start finding the zeros of that polynomial? P's and Q's, good, right? So, and yes, we can graph it too, right? But let's list out all the P values and all the Q's first to get an idea of what they might be, and then we can go to our graph to see which ones we want to test, right? So what would be my values for P this time? Good. Plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, and plus or minus 4. Because again, we're looking at the factors of 4 down here, and that's how we get these values. Now, this time for the Q values, what are we going to get for that? Good. Plus or minus 1 and plus or minus 3. And so now we have to do our P over Q. And so what are going to be the values for P over Q this time? Again, if you don't want to have to type everything out, you can always click the raise my hand and just open up your microphone. But good. So 1, 1/3, 2, 2/3, 4, and 4/3. And all those are going to be plus or minus. So plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4, because that's what we get if we just divide each one of them by 1. And then we also have plus or minus 1 over 3, plus or minus 2 over 3, and plus or minus 4 over 3. So remember, since each one of those is plus or minus, we technically have, in this case, 12 total options for our possible rational roots. We don't want to have to test all of those, so that's where we're going to go to our graph. So I'm going to go ahead and graph this one, and then I'll share that screen so we can look at it together. All right, so there's our graph. And so looking at that graph now, what values do you think we might want to check using synthetic division? 2 looks good, right? So we can definitely test 2. Are there any other values we might want to check? Yeah, right. So it looks like it's definitely in the negatives, right? And it's definitely not to -1. So it could be -1/3, could be -2/3. In this case, it might be difficult to see on your screen, but we're actually a little closer to 0 than we are to 1. So it's probably going to be -1/3 that we want to test there, right? But if you had tested -2/3, that'd be legitimate, right? Like, I mean, you're between -1 and 0. But let's go with -1/3 as the other option. So I'm going to test 2 and -1/3 and see if those values work. So let me go back now and share this screen. Right, so I'm going to start with the 2, all right? And so now we've got to list out our coefficients. And if we look here, we've got x to the 4th, x to the 3rd, x squared, x to the 1st, and no x. We're not missing any terms, so we can just go with our coefficients. So that's going to be 3, -2, -1, -12, and -4. And with our synthetic division now, first step, bring down the 3, and we're going to multiply. So now we've got 3 times 2. That should give us 6. Now we add -2 plus 6 should be 4. 4 times 2 should give us 8. -1 plus 8 is 7. 7 times 2 is going to be 14. -12 plus 14, +2. And 2 times 2 is 4. And now when we add those together, we do get a remainder of 0. And that tells us now that 2 is one of our zeros. Now, like I said, we probably want to check -1/3. And rather than going back to the original coefficients, since we know this worked, now we can just work from this line right here. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to put my -1/3 in my box. I'm just going to work with these coefficients that I just got here. Bring down the 3. Again, we're going to multiply. 3 times -1/3, that should be -1. 4 plus -1 is going to be 3. 3 times -1/3, -1 again. 7 plus -1 is going to be 6. 6 times -1/3 is going to be -6/3 or -2. And now when I add 2 and -2, I do get a remainder of 0. And so again tells me that the -1/3 should work. Sarah?
Is there a reason we did it by the products of the first synthetic division instead of going back and doing the original coefficients?
Yes, and the reason is if we had gone back to the original, even if we prove that this works with the original line, the problem there is then we're going to be left with an x cubed on this line right here, and we're not going to be able to factor that or use quadratic formula. So the reason for wanting to continue on is so now, if we started with x to the 4th, we've taken out 2 of our x's now. That means this line down here is now an x squared. And so now we can try either factoring, or if factoring doesn't work, now we can use quadratic formula. Okay, so that's the reason for wanting to continue on there.
Yeah. And does it have to be like the number of less value? You have to do the synthetic division by the products of the number with higher value? So like you couldn't have done it the other way around, could you? You
could. So we could have started with the -1/3 first and then done the 2 second, and it would still give us exactly the same thing.
Okay, cool. Okay. I understand now. Thank you.
Good. Yep. Any other questions there? Okay. All right. So now, like I said, since we've started with x to the 4th, we've taken out 2 x's. That means that this is now an x squared. So we have 3x squared plus 3x plus 6. So that's what that line right there tells us. So now what we would want to do is see, well, can we factor that at all? And I'll go ahead and tell you, no, this one's not going to factor, right, just to kind of save some time. And so if we can't factor it, then we would have to do what? Quadratic, good. All right, so that's what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my quadratic formula. I'm going to come over here and do that. So x equals, so we're going to do -b. Our b value this time is that +3 right there. So that's going to give us a -3 plus or minus the square root of b squared, 3 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is 6, and then we're going to divide all of that by 2a, which is 2 times 3. Any questions up to that point? Okay, so now if we simplify this, we're going to have -3 plus or minus the square root. 3 squared will give us 9. Now we have -4 times 3 times 6. Well, -4 times 3, that should give us -12. 12 times 6 should be a -72. So we're subtracting 72 here. And then we're going to put all of that over 2 times 3, which is just 6. Now at that point, we need to subtract what we have inside the square root. That's going to give us -3 plus or minus square root 9 minus 72 is going to be negative 63. We're dividing that by 6 now. All right, now we need to find a perfect square that goes into this value and then simplify that square root. So do we have any perfect squares that go into 63? 9, good. Right, so in this case, and then I'll go ahead and say, well, since we've got a negative in here, we know we're going to have to bring out what? An I, right? So we've got negative 3 plus or minus. I'm going to bring the I out, and then I'm going to break up the 63 into 9 times 7. Still over 6. So now, what is the square root of 9? 3, good. So I can bring out the 3. So we got negative 3 plus or minus. Now it's going to be 3i times the square root of 7 all over 6. And at that point, that's where we can take each of these values and divide the 6 in the denominator. So once I do that, negative 3 over 6 is going to give us what? Good. So we get negative 1/2 plus or minus. And now when we do this, we can take the 3i divided by 6 and then just tag on the square root of 7. So what's that going to look like when we simplify it? Good. 1/2 I times the square root of 7. So there's our real part, there's our imaginary part, and so now these are 2 of our zeros for that polynomial. So last step, I'm just going to list out all of my zeros because that's what we were looking for. All right, looks like the video is kind of grainy there. Let's see. Just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to see if I can get this working again. right, sorry guys. My Hangouts just decided it was going to quit on me. So let's see. I'm going to restart my device here and just see if I can get that to work. All right, let's see if I can get something else to work instead. All right, I'm gonna hop off and hop back on, so give me 1 second. All right. Hey, everybody. It seems like it's Google that's the issue because I've been trying to get back into Hangouts and that's not working. And that's how I was actually streaming everything that I was writing down. Um, I'm waiting to see if I can get that back up and running. And I'm also looking for another way that I could share what I was doing there rather than using Hangouts. So if you need to go, I understand because I'm working through some tech issues, but I am going to try to work that out, and I'll let you know as soon as I have a solution. All right. First off, can everybody hear me? This is not ideal. Um, let's see now. I'm trying to figure out how to make that screen the focus. I don't know that I can. Um, And that's flipped, so that's not going to work. All right. Yeah, I think we're just going to have to call it a day because every alternative I'm coming up with doesn't seem to be working. You'll definitely have the video for this one. We've got to all the zeros, at least for that example. I'm going to work through what I've got here and see if I can get things up and running again. Hopefully tomorrow we won't have the same issues. But thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.